Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum Stay Curious program. I'm Marquette, and we're so glad you're with us today with a special friend. You all know him, Terry White. Great to see you, Terry.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, known as the Orbital Chief of the Orbital Processing Facilities, an acronym I quickly learned around here, OPF. Those are the three garages around the VAB that when you take a tour, they point them out, and there's other stuff in them now. But there used to be shuttles, and he was the guy that kept them humming on the flow, they called it, from landing to launch. And Terry, great to have you back. How you been?
Thanks. Doing all right. Good.
Good. We got some questions from a friend of yours, Phil Ramsey.
Yes.
And Phil is in our studio here. Good to see you, Phil. He's from Frankfort, Indiana, and he's a pyrotechnics businessman all of his life, and he's got some really good questions. And you brought your briefcase with you.
Yeah.
That we're going to promote Terry's bag of tricks there in his briefcase, see what he pulls out of there to talk about. And if you've got some questions for our good friend here, please give them to Marty Winkle, my co-producer and partner in crime. I believe this is about episode 995.
Okay.
Somewhere around
I knew
there.
we're getting close to 1,000.
We're celebrating 1,000 episodes on Leap Day, February 29th, 2024. So the 1,000th episode, we think, is Tuesday. And, when you get that high, my ciphering and my age gets off a little bit there. So we're pretty close. But we got a special guest. Jonathan Ward's going to be here on Wednesday. We're excited about that. Jonathan, if you're watching, world traveler, wrote 2 fabulous books. The latest one about Eileen Collins, and then, of course, Bringing Columbia Home with Mike Leinbach.
Yes.
And he wrote 2 other wonderful books about what it's like to launch things at Cape Canaveral. So you'll be looking forward to Jonathan Ward on Wednesday as we're celebrating next week our 1,000th episode. We might as well celebrate with you today, our Orbital Processing Chief here, as we look at one of the birds inside of the configuration there of these very crowded buildings, weren't they at times?
Yes. Yeah. That initially in roll in or roll out, we have all the platforms retracted back away from the vehicle. But once we get the vehicle in there and get it at the right height, then we close all these platforms around it, lower some of them down in that. Then we close up the gap to within 12 inches. A lot of the gaps only 6 inches between the platforms and the orbiter, and that way we can work without having to wear fall protection.
And that's important. I'd say NASA was one of the first people to institute fall protection in the industry.
Yeah, and it was mandatory, but the thermal protection system on the outside of the orbiter is extremely fragile, so we didn't want the hardware that's part of the fall protection to get around because it would actually damage the tiles and the blankets. So we did everything we could to mitigate having to wear fall protection.
Well, we're going to take some questions that Phil gave us here, a special guest in the audience. Like, I will answer them here in a little bit. What were your biggest successes, your biggest frustrations, what were your scariest moments? And we might find out what kept Terry awake at night here. So stay tuned for that. We got to thank Larry Pushkar and his wife Pam showing up this week. Larry wearing an original Chris Cali piece of artwork there. And Chris from our Shuttle Fest and so forth. We'll start promoting. Thank you, Larry and Pam, for stopping by and supporting our museum. They live up in Michigan up there and enjoy a vacation down here a couple times a year, I think. And people are always asking us, how can we give your nonprofit money? So
good.
Winston Scott there is telling you, go to not this YouTube program, but go to yesterday's. They don't put it live up there, but there's a big thank you. It says thanks and a $sign on a little tab. And you can just go up to, what's this, $20, goes all the way up to $500 on those increments there. And it goes right to our PayPal account. And thank you, Winston, for promoting us. And, the philosophy of nonprofits doing things well so that they can appease, people who are generous and philanthropic is the same with space program, I think. Yes. But Winston Scott has this is a saying that Winston carried with him from his grandmother, and it's in his book Reflections. If a task is once begun, Never leave it alone until it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all.
If you're going to do something, do it all the way.
That's right. And that's how we feel about our nonprofit. Like many nonprofits in America, we struggle paying our bills and it happens every month. But same attitude towards doing the space program, like you said.
Yeah.
There was no problem, big or small, when it came to launching human beings in this spaceship.
Yeah, you just had to work together to solve those problems. Yeah.
And some of that working together had never been created before. That's what fascinates me. Speak a little bit about the management and your side of it, dealing with the people, twists and bolts. All this stuff was new.
Well, it was. I mean, some of the technicians I worked with when I initially hired had worked on the Apollo program, but this was a totally new concept, totally different hardware, especially on the outside of the vehicle. So it was a learning process as we went. You know, there was some initial training for it, but basically we had to teach people as we hired them and as it went along, and teach them that the ethics of good business and that. But we are building something that's going to take humans into space, and it has to protect them throughout the entire mission. But then we also had to take care of all the people doing the work. So,
and they did it well through the 3-decade history of the space shuttle. I'm always amazed that the last 3 missions were just brilliant, flawless missions, with everybody knowing they had their pink slip in their hand. And we talked about it. Terry was instrumental in getting some of them jobs after the end of the career there. But we'll get to some questions here in a minute. Want to have a little fun that everybody, particularly the ladies, like seeing this gentleman come around here because you give out free hugs there. I got my hug from you, buddy. But I'm actually kind of coming off a cold here, so I didn't get too close to you. But this is the I wanted to throw a couple. Marty goes, Mark, you only got 8 or 9 pictures in here. And I said, yep, we want to hear Terry talk today. But I got to throw this beautiful picture in there. We love that. I just love that's from a T-38, I would guess. One of the only aircraft allowed in the area. What other aircraft would be flying around during a shuttle launch?
Well, when the shuttle launched, we had helicopters out of Patrick that were here. They were standing by to do rescue in case there was an issue. And the crew had to actually bail out of an orbiter. So they were here to do that. But the only other aircraft flying around was the shuttle trainer would generally be here flying, but the T-38's flying around. Otherwise, the airspace was closed to everybody else. So.
Or you get in big trouble, and Terry did an excellent show. Wait, what happened to STS? Oh, right there. Oh, some way that didn't. Thought I had STS-1 in there. There's your place of work.
Yes.
And you were there 30 years, as we show you there. Over actually more than that when you do the math. I guess.
34 years. Yeah.
30. Yeah. I told you I didn't cipher very well.
Okay.
We talk about American pride of pulling in that, showing your badge every day, and then pulling in there, and you're underneath the largest single-story building in the world.
Yep, and the largest individual spacecraft. Everything else we launched was capsules and that.
Yes,
right. And satellites and that, but nothing was ever as big as one of the orbiters going to space. But yeah, there's a lot of pride in what we did. I mean, you're coming into work, and there's a few people that just treated it strictly as a job, but there was the majority of them, no, they were so proud of what they were getting to work on and what they were part of, that even when we came to periods where the government said they were going to shut down and they weren't going to pay people, and I said, we still have to come in and work on the vehicle. You cannot leave it set without doing certain things to it every single day. There's stuff that has to be checked. There's stuff that has to be serviced. There's things that have to be run. And our HR could not believe it. I said, go there. I said, the techs will come to work if I ask them. They said, no, they won't. I said, walk around. We'd walk around, and I'd say, you pick a tech. I said, hey, if we're not going to get paid next week and I still need you to come in and do your job, will you come in? They said, yeah, I can't do it for a long period of time, but yeah. So, because I have a family, but I'll come in and work because of this, the black and white thing. Yeah, it wasn't
Well,
the company badge, it wasn't the NASA badge, it was the black and white thing, the orbiter itself.
well, we talked about a brilliant show that Terry did an episode on Columbia last month about the we lost 7 beautiful human beings, but the 8th member that we lost was the bird, Columbia, and so you see people are so attached to it that they come in and work for free because they know you just can't shut the garage door on this thing and go back.
You have to maintain it. Yeah.
That's well, we know that. Well, these are the things we love talking about because I think Joe and Jane America out there don't lose sight of the fact of our space program in general and how everyone working on Artemis has the same amount of pride, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yep.
And
it gets me when you talk to some of the general public, and then they say, well, we really shouldn't be going to space. It costs too much money. And I said, well, there is never any money in space unless an astronaut carries a handful of dollar bills as souvenirs. I said, otherwise, all that money is spent on salaries and materials here on Earth to put that spacecraft up there.
Absolutely.
But I said the whole world respects our space program.
Buy homes, cars, groceries, stuff like that for sure. Well, we know that your son Travis is watching, and where's he watching from? Our military friend.
Well, he's in Colorado Springs today, but tomorrow he's on his way to Germany for another month. So,
all right, Travis. Well, thank you for your service to our country, and your daughter Rebecca's in the Navy, was in the Navy, and raising kids now. And thank you for the delicious shrimp gumbo there, Rebecca. I shared it with some of our people here, and so you can send that home with Dad anytime.
So, and when we're talking about questions, Travis sent a couple of questions, but one of them he wanted to make sure that I answered today. He said, what other family members worked in the shuttle program? So some of them go back even further than that. In the 50s, my one cousin Richard White came down here to work, so he worked on the earlier rockets that were being launched out of Cape Canaveral on that. And then his brother Robert, known as Bobby Lee, came next, and he was an engineer working on the Apollo program. And then my dad came down here in '65 to work on the Apollo program. And then his name was Bob White. So and I was the next one to go to work out there. Well, Richard's wife, Claire, went to work out here as well. But in 1978, I got hired by Rockwell, that was former North American Aviation, and Rockwell, to come out here and as a mechanic to work on the orbiters as a space vehicle test mechanic. So, and then after that, my brother got hired on to work in logistics. My other brother got hired on to work on the thermal protection system. She wasn't my girlfriend or my wife at the time, but Pat Sherwood got hired on to work on the thermal protection system, and years later she became my wife. So, so we had a lot of family members out here.
Well, I enjoyed, we were out you've had a lot of family members. You were the only NASA one, or were they contractors also?
All of them were contractors, just like me. Yeah, I was contracted.
Oh, you're contracted.
I didn't physically work for NASA. Nope. So, Richard worked on the shuttle program. He worked on the tank. He was a quality supervisor and then quality manager on the external tank. So,
well, Travis, you also had a question to your old man. What benefits are in our civilian population?
What did the space shuttle do to benefit
our civilian population?
That would be 2 or 3 shows to answer all those questions.
Right.
But
there's we don't want you to answer the military ones.
Well, many things. Well, one of the
here.
military ones is the space shuttle carried a lot of GPS satellites up, and the general public uses GPS every day. But the military has relied on it for years. But there's so many things in our day-to-day lives that are spin-off from the space program. Not only the science and the technology, but the medical advances that came from trying to keep the astronauts in the top medical conditions and that, and all the things they learned from them spun off into the civilian programs and that. They have worked on things in space that they cannot develop here on Earth. They can build them in space to help the medical professions. But they do clothing, shoes, even though astronauts rarely wear shoes in space, but when they exercise on the treadmill and that, they wear shoes. But food preservation. years ago when I was growing up, we didn't have things like MREs, meals ready to eat, or the camping foods and all that. You carried canned goods out, or and that. So all of that was spin off from space to package food for the astronauts in it. But there's so many things out there that were developed for the space program that benefited the human population.
Yeah, food. You see a beef stew just sitting on there on the shelf beside the macaroni, and you're going, really?
Yeah.
And then I'll try it, and you're like, okay. Marty, you have a question?
No, just to follow up with what Terry's saying. Think about the computers that you have now, the cell phones you have, the weather satellites. I mean, those are things that didn't exist, when we were growing up.
Yes,
Yeah, especially the weather satellites. Now everybody just expects to know what the weather's coming up for the next few days. Until we had those weather satellites, there was no clue. It was looking
It's
at
on your iPhone.
Yeah, being a newbie to Florida, and let's just think 100 years ago, not knowing hurricanes were coming at you.
Yeah.
And the lives that have been saved and all that sort of stuff. But let's don't talk about hurricanes, because most of us think down here, hurricanes, we think of our homeowners insurance. Going through the roof there. Marty, a question from someone staying curious today.
Yeah, I think it's Terry's daughter, I think, Amanda Chambers.
That's my niece,
Your
yes.
niece, okay. Anyway, Logan asked about your favorite memory or story from meeting an astronaut. I don't have my glasses on.
Favorite astronaut story.
When they came up here, we took them out on a tour to the Space Center, and then they got to listen to an astronaut talk, which you do quite a bit, to go out there and listen and ask an astronaut questions of that. So that was a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun for anybody that gets to go out there.
I think they asked who was your favorite one.
Oh, who was my favorite one? I don't know. One of my favorite times was they had the unveiling of the brand new Corvette a couple of years ago at the Space Center. And they actually, GM brought it down here and they raced it up and down the runway and that, but they had the unveiling at the visitor center, and a lot of astronauts own Corvettes. That goes all the way back to Mercury, Gemini, Apollo. Those astronauts drove Corvettes because a local Corvette dealer leased them a Corvette for $1 a year.
Bruce Melnick's one. I've seen Bruce's hot rod.
Yeah.
Jim Rathman.
Yeah, yep. Jim Rathman was the Chevy dealer. But so at the unveiling, there was a bunch of astronauts there, and they actually had Neil Armstrong's Corvette there on display. But I went over to talk to the astronauts as they were signing autographs, and there was a line of people lined up to get autographs. And one lady asked me, she says, well, what flights did you fly on? I said, I'm sorry, I'm not an astronaut. I said, I'm the pit crew. She says, what? I said, I was one of the people that built the orbiter and got ready for the flights and all that. And she says, well, I want your autograph. And so all of a sudden the whole line shifted over to me. And Mike McCulley was standing there, and he looks at me and says, might have known you'd have pulled some trick like that.
That's a good one. I like that. And Marty, I think you can confirm this. Your friend Steve Smith's going to be out to encounter next couple of weeks out there.
Yep.
I know you like getting up with him.
Yeah, and I like to go out and talk to him. He does a good presentation.
Another question, Marty?
No, let me just read that question, Terry, because I don't think you answered this question totally. Okay, your favorite, talk about your hot favorite memory. Don't understand that, so you may be leading to something, or a story from meeting an astronaut.
Oh, for me meeting an astronaut? Yeah.
Or a hot favorite story.
And his name eludes me, but he was on the first Endeavor flight, and it'll come to me in a second. Tom Akers. Yeah. So any rate,
49. SCS 49. Space three-man spacewalk.
Yeah. So it was a Saturday, and I walked into the operations desk, and there was a guy standing there in blue jeans and a golf shirt on and that, and talking to the pad leader. And I had an Endeavor hat on, and the guy turns around and looks at me and he says, hey, where'd you get that hat? And I said, well, one of our employees owns Space Shirts. It's a business right outside the south gate, and he sells shirts and hats and that, so you can just go by there and get one. And he says, well, I can't get down there. I said, well, how'd you get to work? And he says, I flew in on a T-38. So I said, well, who are you? And he says, he points up at the mission patch there behind the ops desk, and he says, that's me, Tom Akers. And I said, all right, Tom. I said, come on. I took him up to my office and showed him. I said, okay, tell me what color, and that you want. And I said, I'll get you a hat. I'll just have it here on my desk. And next time you fly in here, you can come up here and get it. And I said, I'll get you a good price on that. And he said, well, I need one for every member of the crew. And I said, all right. So we picked them out. So
You got one for Kathy Thornton. We just saw her, didn't we, Marty? Marty, I know of 3 astronauts driving around the Merritt Island and Space Coast here in Corvettes. You know them too. That would be Winston Scott, Bruce Melnick, and Mike McCulley.
Yep.
That's some nice credit. There's probably a couple more. Kay Heyer, she drives her Mercedes around here. SL. Yes, Marty, a question.
Carlton Bentley's asking, Terry, over the years as a photographer, a gentleman named Bob White was a volunteer at the press site and would escort the photographers around. Was that your dad?
no, different Bob White. My dad was a manager in logistics.
I don't have an answer for that.
Okay. Marty's got his Google on it. Interesting. We got Phil Ramsey in here. Phil, we're glad to meet you. He's a pyrotechnics expert from Frankfort, Indiana, a good space geek. He's got a lot of good questions for you, Terry.
Okay.
He wants to ask, what were your biggest successes with the STS program?
135 launches.
Okay.
Each launch was a big success.
And what were your biggest frustrations and disappointments?
Well, the biggest frustration was getting people that weren't in the day-to-day operation to understand what it took to get a vehicle ready to fly. They came down with some requirements that I would try to explain to them. That's not going to work. It's physically impossible to do it within the time frame that you want it done. And they had no concept of what it took until I could finally convince them, you need to come down here and I'll take you inside the vehicle and show you what you want us to do, because we cannot do it in the time span you have. They were being shown drawings of something that needed to be removed, and they couldn't understand by looking at the drawing why we just couldn't go in there and do it, in a few hours. And so,
Instead of a few days.
instead of a few weeks. And I had people.
A few weeks even?
Yeah,
Wow.
people tell me, well, you shouldn't be talking to those NASA folks like that. I said, they don't understand what they're asking for, and the people who should be explaining it probably don't really understand it. So, one day I get a call and said, there's a guy down here at the ops desk that wants to see you. And I went down there, and he flew in from Washington, and he wanted to see. He says, I don't understand, so you're going to show me. I said, I'm not the guy to show you, but I have the guy. And I picked out the tech, and I got the guy a one-time entry permit to go inside the aft. And I said, Jack, take him in there and show him what he wants us to take apart, and ask him how long he thinks it would take him to do that job. So Jack went in, and they came back out an hour later, and the guy goes, oh my God, I had no clue what we wanted you to do. We just thought it was something small and all. I said, no. And I said, and that's not even explaining all the retest we have to do, because everything that we touched and all that, we had to retest those systems and that, especially if we disconnected anything. And he says, no, you're right. He says, we've flown like that a couple of times. I'm sure we can fly again and schedule it at the beginning of a flow when we have time to get the work done. And I said, thanks, Jack.
And again, a Virgin spacecraft, a program that's developing as on the fly and needing just tractor trailers full of $1,000 bills to keep it going.
Well, in the thermal protection system, they thought they had a good design that worked, gluing a special pad to the back of the tile and then gluing the other side of the pad to the skin of the ship. And it turned out, Columbia was partially done. It wasn't completed, but it had thousands of tiles on it, and we realized the tiles weren't going to stay. They say, well, the tiles were falling off. No, they weren't. We were pulling them off because we pull tested every one of them after we put it on, but they were just peeling right off the ship. So then we had to come up with a process to harden the bottom of the tile, which we call densification and that, but we literally had to remove the tiles, and Columbia had almost 32,000 individual tiles on it. We didn't remove and harden all of them before the first flight, but we removed and hardened the entire lower surface and all the critical ones on the upper surface. But that's why we lost tile on STS-1, because all of them weren't hardened.
Phil also asked you here about your biggest disappointments.
I don't know that I had any major disappointments. Again, it was explaining to people, what it was really going to take to get the work done, and and a lot of schedule pressure. They tell you, oh well, after Apollo 1, we're not going to mandate schedule. We were under schedule pressure all the time. So and I said, you don't understand. You can't just do that. They had the philosophy, well, if it takes 9 months to get a baby, you ought to be able to get a baby in 1 month if you use 9 women. I said, no, it doesn't work that way, So it's, you have to do things in the right order, the right way, and not always the same person can do that. They would tell me, oh, well, get some other tech to do it. So it doesn't work that way. This is the guy or this is the girl that has to do this task, and that's the way we'll schedule it.
Well, Phil's got another good one here. Our guest that's here at our museum, Phil Ramsey. Did astronauts complain about equipment and procedures much to you privately, and how much interest did they take in their spacecraft?
They varied. Some of them took a lot of interest. STS-1, Crippen came around, but John Young's the one who walked around and asked questions, and he would come to me, and I told him the best time to go around and talk to the people actually working on the vehicle was on second shift. There wasn't a lot of other people around, and also don't show up in your flight suit. The minute the astronaut walks in a blue suit, all of a sudden, everybody's gathering around them, and because they are a celebrity, but, I said, just so he would come in casual, and I said, come to me so I can brief you, you know the rules of the area, but I can brief you of any hazardous operations and then he would go up, and I said, some people will freely talk to you. I'm not sure they all will, but they would go up and ask questions, sit down on the work stand and talk to him and that. So he was really good to get along. Like Crippen was a good guy, but I didn't see him coming in and asking. And other astronauts would come around and say, well, can I go talk to you folks? I said, sure. Yeah.
Were commanders particularly interested, particularly commanders that had multiple flights and they were going in there?
Yes, they were, and some of the crews would just stand there and watch, and others of them, but you usually started out with the commander and said, okay, well, I want you to do this, and he goes, oh, wait a minute, I've flown 3 times, I've been told never touch that, and I said, well, now I'm telling you, you got to touch that.
Oh, okay. That's good stuff there. Thanks for bringing those questions up, Phil. We got another one from somebody watching Stay Curious today.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions, Mark. Gary Gerald, Terry, what were some of your experiences around or on the launch pads?
On the launch pads, there were various experiences, but one I had different head knocking hazards. In the Orbital Processing Facility, the vertical tail is at the very top.
Oh yeah, I meant to bring a model in here.
Yeah, it's at the very.
There's a bigger model.
Yeah, it's in the horizontal processing. It's way high up, so you don't have much option to run into it. At the pad in the vertical position, the platform that goes underneath here, I actually had to duck way underneath that to stop from running into the vertical stabilizer. So I was always concerned about running in. But at the pad, you were out in the weather, you were out in the wind, and the vehicle was moving, especially if there's any wind. The whole vehicle shook out there at the pad, moved back and forth. So some of your tasks were really difficult. But out in the weather, in the winter, it was out there cold, like it's been here the last couple of days. It's really tough because you're right off of the ocean and you're up there in the breeze working on the vehicle and that. So it was tough working out in the weather, and the vehicle was never designed to be worked on at the pad. So we had to erect special temporary platforms and that to go do work.
Maybe wear gloves on a tool where you wouldn't.
Well, you had to wear gloves on the outside of the vehicle anyway, because you weren't allowed to touch the vehicle without cotton gloves on. But yeah, in a winter you had to wear gloves for that, and gloves for handling the tools and that. But yeah, and then you under the FOD rules, so every tool had to be tethered to you or tethered to the work stand, and that if it was a real heavy tool, you didn't want to drop a heavy tool and it pull you off at the pad. But yeah, so one of the hazardous ones was working STS-2 207 foot above the MLP. We had a oxidizer spill, and it caused the paint on the outside of the vehicle turned to a liquid. It didn't hurt the bonding of the tile, but we had to remove 380 some tile out of the pad, but they were sliding off after the initial spill.
Huh.
So I had to stand up there on a narrow board with two other guys, and we had literally holding the tiles on the ship that we could take them off one at a time and put them in special bags to go have them heat cleaned to get the oxidizer out of them. It didn't hurt the tiles, but we had to clean them before we could reuse them. And we stood up there all night long because we're the only three that had hardline breathing certification. So no one could take our place. So we had to stand up there holding those on and do that. And then third shift came in. They didn't have anybody with certification. So the three of us stayed up there. And in the morning, first shift came in, and they had started a class to get people the hardline breathing certification. So halfway through the morning, some of them got the certification, come up and take over for us, holding them on. But we didn't drop a single one, and we took all of them off.
I know Marty's got a question, but certification. Explain that. You
Okay,
take a class and
yeah,
take a test, or
take a class and then do on the job training. For something like hardline breathing, it's just a matter of passing, knowing how to put the mask on properly and passing the fit check of it and that. So that was just a training thing. But a lot of our training classes, you went to the class and then you had to go out and do on the job training. You just couldn't go out and start working on it until you mentored under another technician for a period of time. Some of the certifications took 2 years to get the certification. Yes.
So it could be a matter of just a half hour learn how to put a mask on, or 2 years to learn something else to put you in that position.
To be a
orbiter.
spacecraft operator. That's the one who sits in the orbiter in the pilot commander seat and flies the orbiter when it's on the ground.
Okay.
They're the ones doing all the things that the astronauts would do.
You're going to try to get me one of those on our
I'm
show
working
here,
on them.
Derek.
I'm working on them.
Marty, another question, sir.
Question from Doug Forrest.
Hi, Doug.
Were the tiles that were removed by the techs able to be reused? What he asked about? I guess that's it. Yeah.
It depends on why we were removing the tile. If it had a damage, we definitely weren't going to reuse that tile because it was damaged. We'd replace it. And sometimes when we took one off, we wanted to make a better fit, so we put a new tile on that fit better in its place. But otherwise, some of them we took off. If we could get them cleaned up and they didn't have a lot of surface cracks on them, we could rebond that same tile and fly it. But in some cases, we look at it and say, no, it's not worth going through all the effort to reinstall this tile. Let's spend our time on a brand new tile. So
now, when I look up at beautiful Atlantis there at the visitors complex here, what are the new tiles? They have a distinct color.
Yeah, if you look at a picture of an orbiter, especially on the underside, you can see it. The new tiles are nice and pristine black, and then the different shades when they get down, and then the ones that are all gray looking, they have been on for all 33 flights. So
yeah, and you see some of the patina on them where the flow of the
you
fire
can actually,
plasma's
you
gone
can
over.
actually tell after STS-1, we knew exactly how the airflow was on re-entry.
Yeah,
And the original design engineers weren't quite right with how the air was going to flow. But when you go and look at Atlantis, you can see exactly from the outgassing, you can see the heat streaks on there.
How far off were the engineers from the
They weren't
thing?
much at all, but it was just enough to make a slight difference. It says, because it comes in at an angle, which we expected some of that, but most of the training we had was evaluating nose to aft flow, and this was actually an angle flow across the vehicle.
Another question, Marty?
Question from Lynn Feather. What was the shortest time it took to process the Shuttle 4 flight?
The shortest in the Orbital Processing Facility was 29 days, but Atlantis has the record for the shortest turnaround, and it was for its second flight. And I forget how it was. Usually they'd be in the Orbital Processing Facility for several months, then in the VAB for 7 to 10 days, and then out at the pad for a couple of months. But I think the second flight of Atlantis from its landing to launch was only a couple of months. It was in October of 85.
I'm looking at my shuttle scroll here. You got another question, Marty? No, Atlantis' maiden flight was, October 85,
And
and then it went November 85.
Yeah,
so October 3rd launched STS-51J, the late Carol Bobko, and was the commander, and then it was launched, 6 weeks later, November
Yep,
26th.
that was the shortest flow.
And
Yeah.
that was Brewster Shaw.
Yep.
His second flight, 61B, that had Charlie Walker on it. Marty, that was the abort. I believe that was the first launch abort.
Yeah.
61B, there that Charlie's talked about as being the ultimate pucker factor here on our Stay Curious
What-
show there.
Okay, you have another question? Go ahead.
Thanks, Terry. We have a question from Mark Usiak. Why were the shuttle tiles square or rectangular versus the shape of the SpaceX Starship ones?
Well, they're square or rectangular, but not all of them are. There are a bunch of them that are curved and that are J-shaped in that, but and they're also set on.
Getting your bag of tricks
Yeah,
there.
they're set
Terry.
on an angle. In other words, on the vehicle, they are not in this orientation on the vehicle, so they don't have the flat side exposed to the forward. They're actually set on an angle so that the airflow is coming across a corner of the tile instead of flat against the side. I have not seen it, but I understand that the Russians did not build their orbiter that way, so they had some severe temperature issues with theirs because of the way they set them. But because the vehicle flexes, expands, and contracts, turns out that 6 inches by 6 inches was the most probable size of the tile so that it didn't overstress the structure. If we use too big of tiles, the vehicle itself, being predominantly aluminum, could not flex like it needs to. If you ever look when you're flying on an airplane and see how much that wing is flexing in that, this vehicle flexes a lot.
That scares me, seeing that
and,
wing
and that's
flex.
why there's so many tiles
That's
on
why
there.
it
If we
flies.
use larger tiles, it would not allow the vehicle to flex like it needs to.
So what's the numbers mean on there, Terry?
Okay, the numbers tell us where that tile goes on the vehicle, and then the serial number, the last part of it is that is how we trace that tile. We could trace it all the way back to the original bag of sand that it came from.
No way.
Yeah, because the tiles are made from silica. But you do that in the space program because if you find an issue with one, you need to trace back and see what other tiles were made from that same batch or all the way back to the machining and all that so you can determine if you have any other issues.
Now, did the food industry copy that, or did the space industry copy
I don't
the
know.
food
We tried
industry? 'Cause-
barcoding the tiles. That didn't work very well, so they could read them fast.
Yeah, I was going white. Yeah,
It,
no
it
bar.
did, but we tried painting barcodes on them. It just didn't hold up. The numbers held, and some of the numbers were actually 1 inch in size instead of the smaller
Boy,
ones.
that
like
is a nice tile.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, it weighs about an ounce.
9 pounds per a whole cubic foot of material. 12 by 12 by 12 weighs 9 pounds.
Huh.
So
That's
the
it.
lightest we had was 8 pounds per cubic foot.
Great questions there, everybody. Today, talking to Terry White, always a popular guest on our Stay Curious video podcast. Tell all your friends we're going to hit 1,000 shows next week, and we've already got a great week lined up with Clay Walker. I didn't tell you he's going to come on Monday, and he's worked out at the Slick 6 at Vandenberg and has personal photos of the launch pad at Vandenberg that Air Force was going to run by Shuttle Discovery.
Mhm.
Just hand the government a couple $1 billion, now it's ours. Well, I'm sure that would be the way. They were just going to say it's ours. They weren't going to hand it nothing.
The Air Force paid for part of the construction of Discovery and Atlantis.
Oh, did they really?
Yep. So at any rate, I got a couple of
Yeah,
questions
please,
here
Terry.
from my son. He wanted to know what were some of the dangerous jobs that I participated in the space. Well, one of them was, like I explained earlier, the working at heights, working off these, 18-inch by 4 foot long temporary platforms that were hung by ropes out at the pad. The closest thing you could see it is to some of the things off the side of ships in the Navy where they're out there scraping paint and stuff like that.
Okay.
But these, we call them the high crew, but a group of people that hung these special temporary platforms at different places out there. And then you went up, and in the earlier days, we did not wear fall protection on. So you were out there on that platform way high up in the air without any fall protection. And then the other thing was working under a suspended load. So to work underneath, like in the VAB, when we're lifting the orbiter up to go mate it to the external tank and to the boosters and that, you're lifting this 200,000 pound plus orbiter up with 2 cranes, and then we had to go underneath it. So now you're under a suspended load. If something failed, there's no way you were getting out without being crushed in that. So they gave you a nice red vest so they'd know it was you if they ever dropped one on you.
A red vest.
Yeah.
Okay.
So any rate, but then we had to go underneath there because we closed the landing gear for flight in the VAB in the earlier days. We actually rolled over on our tires and then closed the doors over there. But then you were actually pulling some special material out, which I'll explain in another show, out. But we'd actually sometimes get the orbiter swaying over there. It's hanging from two cranes, and people would say, "Ah!" They said, "What are you going to do to stop it?" And I said, "I'm going to put my hands on it and hold it." Well, these guys continue to pull this out so it doesn't swing back. So you're holding this 200,000-pound vehicle from swinging. So that was a dangerous
No,
job.
wait, are you Superman? How could you be holding on just one person?
Because it's on a pendulum, it doesn't take much to stop it. I just have to match what that tech is pulling against. I don't have to support the vehicle. I just have to match the
So
load.
you've literally had an orbiter in your hands,
Yes.
suspended.
Yes.
That's cool. That's
Multiple
cool, Terry.
times. Yeah.
Multiple times. That's neat.
And then one of the other things in the earlier days, when we had one vehicle and we were out at the pad, there was a lot of clears associated with processing at the pad where we couldn't be inside the pad perimeter fence. Well, upper management didn't think that it was right that, especially on second shift, that my techs set out in the break room or something because they couldn't be working on the vehicle. So they found things for us to do. One of the things they found us to do was go out to some of the old warehouses out on Cape Canaveral, down by the warehouse, by the lighthouse, and cleaned out these buildings. Get old pallets of stuff like that out of there. So I said, this is bull. But in cleaning up one of them, we found 3 different rattlesnakes that had come into the building right in there. So, it's not what you're actually expecting. But and the guys had jumped back, and I said, look, it's not going to bother you. We'll just use a broom and push it out the door and get rid of it. And I said, we are a wildlife refuge.
Well, our hard hat that we have on display of John Glenn's was found in a locker out at Cape Canaveral that they were going to have demolition and all kinds of stuff's in there.
Yeah,
I've heard one of the mole blue suits, blue because the Air Force, the Manned Orbiting Laboratory. Yeah. There's one in the Oklahoma City beautiful space museum there. That was found in a locker out there.
Well, one time they told us we needed to go up to the VAB and clean up some floors up there that have dozens of desks that have been up there since the Apollo days. So I tell the guys up there, you got to move all these desks over the elevator, take them down, load them on a semi and that. They started opening the drawers, and there was still a bunch of posters and stickers and patches from the Apollo days in these drawers. And I said, well, what do we do with those? I said, this is supposed to be going to Ransom Road to the scrap thing, so you can have all of those that you find.
Who knows what was in there?
Yep.
Maybe a crew signed Apollo 11 photo worth $5,000.
Yeah, so that was some of the dirty jobs we had to do. That
They want to keep you busy. They don't want you sitting around twiddling your thumbs. We kind of see a lot of people looking at their phones while they're working these days. That would not be allowed out there.
No, we never. Even when they passed the thing and they said, well, because we didn't allow cell phones in the processing area, and when they came back and said, well, we've determined now the signal from the cell phone will not set off the pyrotechnics. And I said, that's fine, but they don't need the phone in there. I don't need anybody using their phone while they're in there. They're supposed to be working. We have landline phones in there that if they have to make a phone call, they can make it, but otherwise cell phones stay out in the hall.
Well, the first 10 years from 81 to 91, there was no cell phones at all.
Not to speak of.
No, it would be the late 80s that came on vogue. Marty, another question from one of our Stay Curious fans.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, but Neil 1030 has 41D Discovery was first aboard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, 1040, for correcting me.
Yeah,
there.
we had quite a few aborts.
Charlie Walker was on that one also.
Yeah.
41D. Appreciate that.
So, got another
can't get nothing by any space geeks there, man. But that was off the top of my head there, and I didn't. But he's absolutely right. 40. But yes, Charlie Walker's. He still call it the ultimate pucker factor here on our show there. Question. We got Phil in here. Phil's got another interesting question. Did you ever wish you were on the crew going up in
Actually,
space?
astronauts would ask me that. Are you willing to fly in it? I said, yeah, I'd like to fly in it. I don't know that I would like to stay up there for the length of time that they were, but I flew in a 0G, the Vomit Comet, and that was neat. and that. So I flew as an evaluator for people that were doing tasks on the flight, but to go up into space, I thought would be really interesting, and it would be, of course, a lot of fun. But I'm not going to afford to go up there now as a space tourist.
$250,000 to fly the balloon out of our Titusville airport. That's a bargain. Gonna pass on that. Well, we've enjoyed our conversation with Terry here. Going to ask him a few more questions. He graciously comes on Stay Curious once a month and sometimes more to talk about the shuttles of the month. I wanted to brag about our shuttles of the month there of February. We got these beautiful shuttles. I didn't load up a slide on it, and that's all right. We do things the way we have to here. 11 beautiful flights. All orbiters flew, Terry, including the first untethered flight 41B, the first Mir rendezvous with a very special lady, Eileen Collins, the first pilot of a spacecraft, and then she became
First
the first
female
commander.
pilot. Yes.
And we're going to have the person that helped her write her book, Jonathan Ward, on here Wednesday. And we had the last ISS hardware, the cupola there. I didn't give you the missions. 41B there in the upper left is the untethered, famous Bruce McCandless, but also Bob Stewart flew the same thing. No one knows the second person doing anything, but that was Bob Stewart. And we've got a Hubble repair there, and I love the 130 there with the cupola is the outline of the patch, and that's our friend Kay Heyer, who was on that mission 130 on there. So
Kay Heyer was an engineer working here at Kennedy Space Center in the Orbital Processing Facility before she became an astronaut.
yeah, so you were her boss, huh?
No, she worked for NASA. She didn't work for the contractor, but yeah.
There's the OPF there. You always know those buildings because you got to have the stabilizer there.
Yeah,
we're not going to make the door as big to go all the way up. We're just going to cut a hole in it.
Yeah. A little special door just for the vertical tail.
It's a common sight to you, my friend, as an everyday work experience, but it had to be so exciting whether it came from California or landed in your backyard there to bring them back
Or in
home.
the earlier days when we had only 2 hangars and not enough hangar space for everybody, we're constantly having to take one and put it down on its landing gear, roll it over to the VAB, and park it in one of the high bays over there. Well, we got one in from flight and deservice it, and then we would swap them back around. So we're constantly moving orbiters around just because we didn't have enough hangar space.
Phil also had a question, Phil Ramsey here, about how did they wear? Like a car, they know certain things are going to wear out, ball bearings, things like that, drivetrain.
Yeah.
What were sort of the over 135 launches and 5 orbiters, of course, what were some of the common things that had to be retooled besides the tiles?
One of the common things was we replaced the main landing gear tires after every flight because of the stress they saw on landing, and that the nose, we inspected them and generally got 2 flights out of them. So that's one of the things that we, repacked the wheel bearings, and we had a lot of issues with brakes in the earlier days, and the drag chute helped on that, but we did a lot of brake mods and that, and we actually went to larger tires. After Columbia, we went to the largest diameter tire, outside diameter tire we could have, and still get the landing gear doors closed.
Speaking of tires, you also upgraded them.
Yes.
There was some good chrome covers on them, didn't you? There.
So, covers put over them. So, okay. Question.
Yeah, that fit right in there, buddy. There, but how'd that happen?
I recall seeing it, but I forget how it happened.
Look at how cool those are. The shape of the orbiter, by the way.
Yeah, put on there. Yeah, somebody put those covers over them out of the runway. So yeah.
All right, Marty's got a couple questions there to take us out today.
Yeah, we have 4 right now. Mark Usiak is asking, on a lighter note, when did you grow your signature mustache? Before or after you were working on the shuttle?
Way before.
Way before. So it was black at one point.
It was black, but
or brunette.
I started turning gray at 21 years old. People said, "Why'd you do that?" I said, "Well,
Why'd you do that? Like you had control over it,
I said
right?
I was in the military and I was flying around on helicopters, jumping out on burning airplanes, so it kind of turned my hair gray. But no, it was soon after I got out of the military, then I started growing the handlebar mustache.
Vietnam military, folks. Kind of a different type of military back then. Marty, go ahead. Another one, please.
Elizabeth was asking, how many techs did it take to process a shuttle into high bay?
You need to answer that. You were my administrative assistant. You kept track of numbers, but yeah, it varied. But we had basically broke the orbiter down into 3 different sections to process it. We had an aft crew, we had a mid-body crew, and the mid-body crew took care of the wings, the payload bay doors, and the main landing gear. Then we had a forward crew that had the spacecraft operators, but they took care of the forward and that. And then we had the thermal protection system that took care of the whole outside of the ship. But it varied from the number of technicians, but there was less than 200 hands-on technicians working on all 3 orbiters. So for the Orbital Processing Facility, and some of them went with it out to the pad. So yeah.
Okay.
And in the earlier days, we had more than 200 techs working on the thermal protection system on first shift. So, with only 1 vehicle. But yeah, later on, we streamlined it down. But the orbiters got better. I mean, for years we had different flows, required a lot more work in that, especially change out for one payload to the next. But for the last few flights of the orbiters, they were actually coming back in pristine shape. It was a matter of almost just, change the tires and stick the new payload in and let's go fly again.
Well, Phil's question about other things that you had to maintenance were very few. And remember, these orbiters were sold to Congress to last 100 missions.
They were. And then
how many do you think we could have got out of Discovery and Atlantis?
Well, we could have got more. We got the most out of Discovery and that. But some of the orbital maneuvering pods, we actually got a lot more than 40 flights out of the pods because we changed them from one vehicle to another. They were interchangeable. That was really the only part, other than we could change the body flap from one to the other. But everything else was pretty much to that vehicle. But it was, the vehicles were getting better and better, but because the environment we're in, especially out the launch pad and that, we had corrosion issues. So there were things we're finding that had to be, redone because of corrosion, or at least inspected and that. And then it was mission life. Like, we were constantly evaluating different things, like the leading edge of the wing, all the different reinforced carbon panels. Say, okay, well, we can fly these ones 5 flights before we have to replace them. These others, we can fly 8 flights in that. And then we reevaluated that after Columbia incident and realized, no, we can't fly that many flights of that. But we're constantly going out and saying, well, how much of this can we do? And it's sad, but Apollo program was expendable vehicles, and they had all kinds of spares on the shelf. The shuttle program was a reusable vehicle, and we didn't have spares on the shelf. We were cannibalizing. When a vehicle would come back and land, we'd go in and take some of the parts off of it and go over and put them on the other. Most of them were associated with payload bay, but like cameras and all that, we didn't have enough cameras, so we'd have to take them out of one vehicle and then go put them in the next one for its flight.
Fascinating, because I know the Apollo era, the workers talk about they had 5 different parts to choose from, that were eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and because they'd all been perfectly tested and on there.
But not for us. I mean, there was times when my dad would have to fly to California, catch a flight out of Orlando, fly to California, and there's somebody out there would be waiting to hand him a part, and he'd turn around and get on a plane and fly back to carry that part back. And there were times in the early days, because the tiles were actually made in California, we didn't have the facility here certified to make the tile. So I would need a tile urgently, in that an astronaut would get in the T-38, fly to California, they would hand him the tile, he would fly to Kennedy Space Center, and I'd have somebody waiting at the runway for him to hand the tile off to, and then he would fly back to Houston so we could get that tile.
Like 3 hours from 2 hours maybe? What's the flight time from Houston to here?
A couple hours, yeah.
2 hours,
Yeah.
so 3 hours.
But he had to go all the way to
California
California first and
back,
then all the way across the country. So, yeah, he's not an SR-71, so it takes him a little bit longer.
The T-38, the taxi
Yeah.
of the astronauts, or their personal ride. Marty, go ahead with another question.
Okay, from Gary Jarrell. Were all the OPFs the same?
They were pretty much the same.
Great question.
OPF 1 and 2 were supposed to be mirror images, and they almost were. Now, OPF 3 was built later, and it was supposed to be a major modification. Like every so many years, you took an orbiter offline, and you went in and did upgrades and modifications, and a lot of more taking it apart for inspections and that. So it didn't have the ability to deservice an orbiter after flight. So we had to deservice it before we could take one over there and that. And then NASA came back and said, well, we really need the capability in all three OPFs to do that kind of work. So we abandoned OPF 3. They went in there and did all the modifications, added all the stuff for hypergalls and everything in there. And then we went back. We had 3 operational bays, and they went back to taking the orbiters all the way back to California for their major modifications, which means after flight, even if it landed in California, you couldn't take it out there to the facilities to get modified because it had all the hazards on board. So we'd have to bring it here, deservice it, and then put it back on the 747 to take it out to California.
Amazing. You like Vidalia onions?
Yes.
That's what Gary grows.
Oh, okay.
In Collins, Georgia there.
Yeah.
Great question, Gary. And I know he's been on the tour with his wife checking out all the OPFs and so forth there. So the good hello to Donnie, your wife there, Gary. Marty, another question?
Question from Lynn Feather. Terry, did you ever think of writing a book about shuttle?
I've been approached by several different publishers to write a book, but I've not sat down and, had the motivation to go sit down and write one. I think about some of the things I put in there, and I say, really, the world may not be able to believe this.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah.
You want to say some things, but you want to be dead, so nobody comes back and gets you. Quite frankly, yes, in there, but. Well, we of course got a great guy, Jonathan Ward there, just done an excellent job, and that's what he told Mike Lineback. Mike has told us on this program that when he met Jonathan Ward, that Jonathan said, "I'll do the heavy lifting." Yeah, and he's done that with Eileen Collins. But we're writing a book here for you all, recording history here like no one else on the internet. Marty, another question.
Tom Ushak is asking, did you have anything to do with the handling of the pieces of the wreckage of the 2 orbiters?
Yes. So when we were picking up they were recovering the pieces of Challenger out of the ocean and off the beach, and they were bringing them in. They were putting them all in a big logistics facility we had. And since my dad was a logistics manager, he called me and he says, "Hey, you want to come down here and see what's coming in?" And I said, "Sure," because it was a controlled area and that. So I went down there to look at it, and I started saying, "Well, that's off the left-hand side wall. That's part of the wing right there." And some of the people down there go, "Well, wait a minute, how do you know that?" I said, "I built it." They said, "Yeah, but how do you know after it's been in the water and all that?" I said, "Because the tiles are shaped different in different locations on the vehicle, and I know the shape, even though they're only pieces, I can tell you exactly where this stuff come from." Well, does anybody else have that knowledge? I said, "Yeah, I got a whole bunch of technicians and engineers that have that knowledge and that." So then we started sending people down there to help them piece it back together. So what they wanted, and then for Columbia, they wanted me to go to Texas and they wanted me to go to Louisiana or Barksdale, where when they found the pieces out in Texas and Louisiana, they were bringing them to Barksdale, categorizing them, and then shipping them back to Kennedy Space Center. And they said, "Because you built it, you need to help us identify all these parts when they come in." And I said, "Except I'm a hunter." I said, "I brought my gear to be in the woods. I didn't bring my gear to be in a Air Force hangar looking just at parts." "Yeah, but what if we need your knowledge?" I said, "You got my phone number. Just call me and you can send me a picture and I'll look at it and that." But I said, and I mentioned several qualified people that were there at Barksdale. I said, they can identify almost all of it as well. So they said, okay. So I went to Texas and had a variety of duties there, but eventually became, they started using the U.S. Forestry helicopters to search. And they said, "Well, we're looking for people." And I said, "Well, I flew air rescue on helicopters. I know how to search with helicopters." And they said, "Okay." So I went out there, and the second day I showed up, they said, "Oh, by the way, you're in charge." So pretty soon I had 37 helicopters flying in Texas searching for parts.
Amazing. And you flew helicopters, correct?
I
In
flew on
Vietnam?
helicopters. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a rescue specialist, so
All
yeah,
right.
I didn't fly.
Marty
so.
also was in a Skorsky helicopters
yeah.
in Vietnam in there. So
I was in the last one in the Air Force inventory that still had wooden rotor blades.
really
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
Well, this is fascinating, Marty. We have another question.
Nope, we're caught up.
Caught up. Good. Well, everybody's enjoyed that today. One final question I'll have from our guest here, Phil Ramsey, in our studio in downtown Titusville. What kept you awake at night?
nothing except the strange noise outside.
Now,
People can't believe it, but I'm one of those people that when I went to work, I worked, and I concentrated on the job. And when I went home, I left work at work, and I concentrated on stuff at home. So, I didn't, and people would say, well, how could you do that? I said, I just turn it off. I leave that there, and I go home and take care of my family and do the things that I wanted to do in the way of hunting or catching wild hogs or whatever. But, and then sometimes, though, because of what was going on at work, even though I thought I had the right people on second and third shift to handle the issues they come up, I'd get phone calls all night long. And some nights my wife would say, why don't you just turn the phone off? And I said, nope, I'll just get dressed and go to work and I'll answer the questions. So some nights at 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd be going back to work to answer questions that were coming up in the middle of the night. I said, it could have waited till in the morning. I said, well, we wanted to. I said, just tell them I'll be in the morning and that. So, yep.
well, that's kind of good to know. Busy people have to compartmentalize a lot of things, like yourself. And I'm amazed, really, Terry, getting to know you, how you compartmentalize what you did with Columbia and so forth. Because I know it was just a life-changing experience for sure in many ways. But you have to compartmentalize the good and the bad. I know Lynn Feathers, that who's one of your workers there.
Yeah, she was my admin, so yeah.
And there's Gary Gerald watching today. Amanda.
Yeah, that's my niece.
All right, Amanda Chambers. Cynthia Rossi, of course, a big autograph fan of ours and yours. Mark Usiak, thank you for the questions. Dave Stangy's got his granddaughter with her today, so glad that she's learning. She's just an infant, about 9 months old, I think, if I remember right. Doug Force is in Los Angeles. Cliff Watson is in Pomona, Australia. He's getting ready to come to America for the Great American Eclipse, and we'll have Cliff in the studio when he visits us in mid-April. Tom Celentano in Connecticut. Patricia White.
My wife's watching.
Pat, good to spend some time with you. Rode the bus out there to 34.
Yeah.
I mean, pad 34.
Yeah, pad 34
for the
Apollo
celebration.
1.
Yeah, really enjoyed your company there, Pat. And Tommy Usiak's watching. Steve Jokums up there in Lake Michigan. Carlton Bailey, he's just down the road there at Cape Canaveral Groves, I mean. Marina R. thank you for watching in the Ukraine. John Borelli, he's the Astronaut Files there in New York. He can't wait to get down here and get his feet warm in the sand. Neil 1030, thank you for always keeping me straight. Appreciate that. Bill Whiting, and I want to give a shout out to Jim Baleen. Happy retirement, Jim. He just retired and was in the museum today, and he's quite a historian out there at Cape Canaveral Space Force group of the museum at Sands. So good to see you, Jim Baleen. Keep coming back. Marty, a final comment?
Got a comment from Doug Forrest. Terry says, do it. Write the book.
Do it. Write the book.
Thanks.
Come a time and a place. Thank you, my friend, for all the happiness that you bring to our museum and the good snacks. He brought us some chocolate peanut Buckeyes.
Yeah. And I want to thank everybody for the questions they submitted. It really makes it nice to have some questions that we know that the audience is interested in. And thanks for the questions up front that were sent in ahead of time. It gives me a little bit of chance to research and refresh my memory. So
Yeah, Phil Ramsey, nice having you in here today, and we appreciate you staying curious with us. So tomorrow's Friday. We're gonna have our volunteer luncheon. Terry, if you want to come back, we'll feed you for our volunteer luncheon here, and I'm gonna dig up some space news. Hopefully, we'll be talking about the landing of a private vehicle on the south pole of the moon, and we've got a group of homeschoolers coming to our museum to look at the moon, so I can't wait to tell them that there's something on the moon, kids. So we wish them luck. The Intuitive Machines probably into their powered descent now, going down for a 5:30 landing today, so we're going to check that out, and maybe a little bit of moonshine tomorrow as the moon will be getting full over the weekend. So Terry, thank you again for all you do to promote the American Space Museum. And I'm Mark Marquette, saying that we appreciate everybody who watches our program, and tell everyone to tune into us so that they can bridge the space between us. We'll see you tomorrow.